So, good afternoon, everyone, and I am absolutely delighted that you've joined us today for this session on preparing and writing a request for tender, which has been led by my esteemed colleague, Piers Voicey, who is our Senior Woodland Officer, and I'm sure he's a familiar face to you all. So he has significant experience in writing tenders for our work at CWA and is the ideal person to lead this session this afternoon. And for those of you who don't know Piers, he provides in-depth community development and land management advice and assistance to our community woodland groups. He's been a forester at Rothay Marcus since 2010, and he has great experience of travelling the world, expanding his craft and projects from Papua New Guinea all the way back to Granton-on-Spey, where he works with Anagach Woodland Trust. This afternoon session is an hour, so you'll have me for 5 minutes nattering to you about CWA, and then Piers is going to take over and he'll go into a bit more detail about what the content of this session is going to be. So if I can indulge you just before we begin to tell you a little bit about Community Woodlands Association, as we have a few non-members joining us today. So Community Woodlands Association helps communities connect to their woodland. We've over 200 members, most of whom are community groups owning or managing woodland in Scotland. And one of the benefits of being a member of Community Woodlands Association is that we advocate in the political arena on behalf of our members. So for example, just now we're currently responding to the Scottish Government's survey on third sector funding on behalf of our members. We provide support and advice to communities who are looking to start up a community woodland group or who already have a woodland and are looking for ongoing support. We listen to our members' needs and then support with training sessions, exchange visits, mentoring programmes, and also through our annual conference, we connect together. Piers offers professional foresting advice. He's able to provide paid advice and consultancy to any groups that request it. And we work in partnership with strategic partners across Scotland to make it easier for our communities to be actively involved in woodland management. And if you're not a CWA member and you would like to investigate a little bit more and find out a little bit more, then I am going to put the link for this CW in our chat just now, or you can scan the QR code just now on your phone if you so wish. So I'll drop that in into the chat in a little minute, the link to our member site. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Piers. Now we are going to do a little bit of team tagging with the slides. You'll just have to bear with us because Piers wants to do a little bit of live typing in the session today whilst he collates your thinking. So just bear with us as we do the navigating around this virtual space of sharing slides and sharing screens, etc. So Piers, over to you. If you want to take control, that would be wonderful.
Great. Thank you very much, Sharon, and good to see you all. I'm quite in awe of you folks and making a presentation like this when I feel as though my experience is somewhat limited and checkered when it comes to preparing tenders. I've done it quite a lot, and not always successfully, so I think I'm still learning from experience and still learning from some of you folks, maybe particularly Andy, because one of your examples I have stolen, and you will see at the end of this presentation. So, preparing and writing a request for tender, otherwise known as invitation to tender. The aims of this session will aim to look at some of the different situations where you might ask for tenders, review the key things to include in a request for tenders, and prepare a detailed specification for a job. And many of you are experienced with this, but others might be newer to it. And yeah, there are lots of opportunities when you might want to invite contractors to prepare a tender document for you, and lots of lots of different environments where this might be appropriate, such as designing and producing threshold signs to harvesting contracts and long-term woodland management service agreements. So first of all, rather than me rabbiting on, oh, Angela, you've got your hand up.
I can't see anything on the screen, and I think one other person might also be in that situation. And so I don't know if it's just us or whether or not that's, and if everybody else can view it okay. It's just saying can't display content.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sharon, you're muted at the moment.
Sorry, thanks, Pierce. I can see. Andrew, can you see? Jack, can you see? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen?
Yeah, I can see fine.
I wonder if Angela and Ridian, if you want to just leave the meeting and rejoin and see if that makes a difference.
Okay, thank you.
Okie doke.
Will I stop sharing for the moment? Will that?
That would be that. If you want to just
Helpful.
do the sharing your desktop copy whilst we're doing that, that might be helpful, Pierce.
If you let those folks in
Yep.
again, that's a shame.
I know. Can you see us on the screen now, Angela?
I can, well, I can see everybody.
Good. We're not sharing. We're not sharing any slides just now.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Ridian, can you see everyone okay?
I can, thank you.
Perfect.
Right. I will try screen sharing again and do it direct from my window. You have to remember where I've got to. Okay.
That's great. Thanks, Piers.
So can everybody see this now? Angela, are you seeing my screen?
Great. I always find that's the best way to fix errors is to leave and come back in.
When in doubt.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm just so what I've got here is my live slide, so it's not in presentation mode, with the aim that oh no, I'm ahead of myself. Where do I want to go? Where was I going to be? I was going to be here. Right. So this is the first question. I went to a different bit of this presentation. So when might you go out to tender? Can you give me some thoughts as to when it would be appropriate to go out to tender and when you might not go out to tender? I'll leave you to unmute and just speak your thoughts, because I can then scribble in on the screen what you say.
When you need comparative quotes and you've got quite a specific job of work that needs detailing.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
You might have to, because it's a condition of your funding.
Yeah.
Andy, you were on mute. I saw your mouth moving, though I'm not sure if you were meant to be saying something out loud.
I did. Just to demonstrate due diligence for charities, I suppose, and that comes back to the comparative quotes, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of in relation to due diligence on public money. Similar to funding conditions, quite often you're asked for 3 quotes. Has anybody been asked for more than 3 quotes?
No.
No.
I think also if you're maybe a little uncertain as to exactly what might be involved, sometimes going to tender and getting different ideas from people is helpful.
That, I think, is a very useful point.
Thanks. I'm just in a webinar at the moment. I'm out at 3. Can I give you a call back? Or is it?
Angela's been interrupted.
I've just muted her.
It's okay. Yeah, it's quite a tricky one, this getting has anyone got any thoughts on when it may not be appropriate to go out to tender?
When you've got an adequate workforce in-house to do the job.
Yeah, thanks, Jack.
And you may also be in a situation, say, well, if you're one of 2 woods fairly close together, where you sometimes swap workforce between the 2. I'm sure you can put that more eloquently.
Yeah.
You might also have a relationship with a trusted contractor, and you know that they're going to do a good job and give you a decent price. And if you're in a hurry for a job, then that might speed things up.
Yeah, all of that's very sound. Thank you. What I could go on is now if I go back to if I then now what do I do? Just trying to think. This is where I get a little bit confused with what I'm doing.
What are you trying to do, Pierce?
Just go back to end screen. There we go. What I'm going to do is go to presentation from current slide. Now I'm back into presentation mode. That's all your answers. Yeah, my thoughts were in terms of when you'd go out to tender is to test the market, getting the best job done for the best cost, requirement of funding bodies, and getting a cost that you can put into a funding application, even if it is just one tender, if the funding body is happy with that. And with respect to not going out to tender, yes, if you've got a trusted local contractor and you have a good working relationship with them, or if the cost of the work is small and you don't want to waste contractors' time looking at and pricing out a job. And then perhaps if it's your own money, it's unreserved funds that you are spending, so you're not meeting the requirements of any funding body. And jobs that you might put out to tender, tree surgery operations that run into several thousands of pounds, building a new section of path, harvesting timber, delivering forest management services, either for a specific project or for establishing new woodland or providing an ongoing inspections, advice and management contractors. What other examples have you got that you may have or are in the pipeline? Do you want to sort of, I'll just write these down, scribble these down, but what are the sort of issues that you're looking at the moment that may require work to go out to tender? I mean, this is a little bit so that I might be able to provide templates or help you do some background research on specs and things like that.
Felling is the main one that we've done, although in the one, and we've just actually completed a bit, we did use an agent, so they assisted with a tender, but we were just discussing this morning about if the next time we come to do it, that we'd probably want to manage it all ourselves rather than using an agent.
Okay.
We've just completed some new signage in Antigua, and that was a tender which was prepared some time ago and has taken a long time to come to fruition, partly because of grant funding and nothing another, but is now complete.
Great. And Rithian, you were putting stuff out to tender for signs, and quite sort of an interesting spec you had on the signs. Were you successful in finding someone?
Not yet, Piers, but I am interested in doing that properly. And also we have some stem injection work we'd like to do in the future. We've not secured any funds for that yet. So there's some stem injection stuff, and there's also some felling of some standing conifers. So yeah, I'm new to this, but we would like to do it in the right way. That's why I'm here. Happy to be here.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, we should. And I mean, this is the advantage of linking up together, is so that, you know, we can share resources and ideas. And long term, I hope that we can set up templates for tender documents on our web, you know, available from our website or available through Sharon, Jen, and myself, whenever that's required. Okay, for me, central to inviting contractors to tender for work is being clear about what you want to be done, to what standards, and by when you want the work to be done. This may take some time and bringing several heads together from your team, potentially consulting with other stakeholders, for example, neighbours or government agencies and your funders. And this is where I've often fallen short, is doing enough preparatory work on the specification, particularly for harvesting work, where timing can be critical. At Rothiemurchus, you know, you had to work your timing around pheasant shooting as well as capercaillie breeding, or, you know, the concerns about badgers, making sure that, you know, if you had badgers on site, then you were working within the prescribed period for when you could work around or close to badger sets. Squirrel drays, nesting birds, you know, all of that was quite significant. And on a place like Rothiemurchus too, then you were having to work around other recreational activities, and considering the health and safety for folks like mountain bikers and people that wanted to use core paths. So if you were doing harvesting work or even spraying work close to core paths, then being able to do things around when it wasn't necessarily your busiest time. And what we talked about earlier, don't be shy about inviting a preferred contractor to meet you on site, to talk over the job with you so that you can be clear about what and how, and the constraints. For example, is the access good enough for them? What are the conservation features, hazards, planning permission, felling license, and how the contractor prefers the work to be marked out on the ground, so that you're really clear as to how to present information to them, how you communicate the information to them. And with their help, you can then prepare a document, a tender document, and they may not need to come back to check the site again in order to submit a tender. So you shouldn't feel as though you're wasting their time or asking more of their services if you do ask them to come out and meet you on site as a pre-tender visit. You know, I think that is often underrated in terms of being value to you. Get the experts out at the earliest possible opportunity, talk things through with you so that you know what you're setting up, and be clear with them that you need to put the work out to tender. They won't be bothered. They'll be delighted to be able to help out usually.
Here, sorry, Andrew's got his hand up. I'm not sure if you're aware.
No, I've had to minimize the screen so I could.
I'll keep you right.
It was just to say that for the mountain bike skills area in Anagach, which was upgraded recently, we had a set amount available in the budget coming from the funding available. And so we met contractors on site and said, what can you do for this amount of money? And that got a range of ideas and allowed us to choose what the most effective package was, which was very helpful indeed.
Okay, that is a useful approach as well, particularly when you're when you've got a limited budget, as you say. So their tender was very much an options-based tender rather than a price-based tender.
It was, yes. Yeah.
Sharon, can you advise me quickly if I want to put it back into the mode that enables me to see what's coming up and what's next? What do I click? I'm in kind of full screen mode at the moment.
I think it might be escape. Just try escape.
Okay, so everybody can see my layout at the moment.
Yeah.
I was just wondering whether there was would I have to stop sharing and come back in?
What are you trying to do?
To sharing so that it's more of a sort of, it's in presentation mode for everybody, but I can see my notes.
Oh, no, you just need to click notes at the bottom of this slide.
I can't even see that at this stage. No, okay, no worry.
Click the three dots at the top right. What does that do? Right, so now you've got the notes bit at the bottom.
Now I've got the notes at the bottom. Yeah, okay. But everybody can see those. That's fine. That's fine. I'm going to minimize this one again.
I think it's probably because you've got your notes open.
Yeah.
Or you could hide the quick access tab, was I think the one at the bottom.
Don't worry. I'll go back into presentation mode, I think, in a minute. So what I wanted to just ask you to contribute again so that we
joys of technology.
What do we include in a tender document? Moving on to what needs to be in a tender document. What are the basics? What are some of the basics? Could you want to shout out again? And then we can go through what I've prepared.
Who the instructing party is.
Sorry, what was that?
Who the instructing party is.
Okay.
Yeah, presumably you want a date for submission and a date for when you want the work carried out.
Description of the works and how much quantities, however much detail you've got. Something about standards. Oh,
yeah.
Got that, sorry.
Yeah.
How the tenders will be evaluated and price and quality and so on.
Yeah.
Possibly a bill of quantities.
I'll tell you what. Yeah. Anything else?
Payment terms.
Yes.
Highlighting that you don't actually have to accept any of the tenders if you don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Insurance requirements and risk assessments.
Yes.
Would you put anything in about the background to the job, i.e. where the site is, how it's accessible, etc.?
Yeah. You might include that in the background too. Yeah.
location map.
Yeah. Great.
And you might also have, if you're moving on to a formal contract, you might also have a copy of the contract that the contractor will be expected to enter into with the client.
Okay, so sort of draft contract. Yeah.
You've got a date for work, but you also need a date for submission of tenders.
Yeah, we've got date for submission.
Oh, so you have.
And this needs to be yeah, be really specific. Yeah.
And
So,
if
yeah.
you're expecting several bids, then you might want a process for dealing with queries coming back from the contractor and how these will be shared with others.
Yeah. Yeah. So all bidders. Great. Yeah, that's pretty comprehensive and covers a lot of what I've pulled from other examples. So moving on, yeah, in the introduction, you want an outline of the work and your organization, your management priorities and your ethos, perhaps. And then go into more detailed specification of the work and the quantities. And the specification details need to match what funding bodies and partners are expecting. Time frame for the work, when you want the start and completion dates to be, and how these relate to other constraints. Dates may be dependent on securing planning permission or funding, so you may not be able to give a specific start date, but you would aim to have the work done by such and such a time, depending on planning permission being provided. You may be constrained by a budget. So this is the case with the Anagach Woods Trust that Andrew referred to recently. State whether there's approval for the work, either planning permission or a felling license. They're the most likely things that need to be in place before you carry out the work. And what do you need to ask of the supplier, the contractor? What methodology and equipment might be used? For plans, it will be helpful to know that the contractor can supply survey data in a format that you can use or edit. So anything from software details to the type of forwarder to be used or other harvesting equipment. And then also who will carry out the work, including subcontractors. You need to ask them for their policies and insurance, if they have health and safety and environmental policies for their organization. And some contractors do, some contractors don't. And you may ask for details of insurance cover once you have chosen a preferred contractor, or you can ask for that evidence to be supplied with the tender. References, ask your supplier for examples of previous work or previous clients who can vouch for the required experience and standard of work. And just ask also for how long the tendered price is valid for, before inflation makes it unviable. Most contractors will do this automatically. They will say this price is this much and it's valid for 3 months, 6 months, something like that. And then other information, which I think you've included already. What's the tender submission date? For example, you want your tender submitted by 9 AM on Thursday, the 14th of May, 2025. Anything received after that date is usually discounted. Tender format. In what format should the tender be delivered in? Do you need a single figure? Do you need an itemized costing? Do you need it categorized by log types, short wood, green log, red log, things like that? And remember to make sure that it's clear about VAT. Does it include or exclude VAT? And you may need the contractor to specify any add-ons, such as supplying map license agreements or Ordnance Survey map license agreements, or other material supply costs or subcontractor costs. Payment, we've covered that a little bit, whether you will pay for the work in installments or whether they will pay for the timber in advance or in installments. So what your payment agreement will be. And we've mentioned also scoring. How will you rate the tenders? Will you base it on 6% on price, 20% on methodology, 20% on references and experience? You may include that, you may not include that. It may, for some jobs, you may just say, well, no, it'll be down to the best price, and you'll trust the contractor to deliver according to their skills, according to their tender. And you may also include an acceptance time limit between when you accept their tender and when you expect to have a contract agreed. So the tendered price will be valid for at least 6 weeks while you get the contractor set up and signed. Even with a well-written invitation to tender, there will be a need for further clarification. Potential bidders may come back to you with questions. And as Andrew said, the questions and your response should be made available to all potential bidders. So yeah, if one contractor comes back to you for clarification, remember to let everybody else know that, you've given this additional information. Otherwise, you could be liable for an unfair process. And remember, this is something that, the tender process is something that enables you to better understand the market, better understand your requirements, understand your value to the provider, and enter into partnership that works for both of you. So it's about establishing working relationships with contractors. And this is going out to tender is sometimes the first stage in that process.
Pierce, Andrew's hands up.
Andrew.
Just to butt in again, Pierce, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Since you mentioned unfair process, I think on that basis, you would be very well advised to have a scoring section in there, because otherwise, if you go for anything other than the lowest price, you might be struggling to justify that either to the other bidders or to others interested in, other stakeholders. But if you've got a quality thing in there as well, then at least you have some basis for saying, well, they give us a rock bottom price, but the job was going to be of equivalent quality, so we've gone for something different. And it may be for the smaller type, maybe most of the community woodland jobs, it's maybe not an issue, but it's certainly something which I've encountered professionally on other contracts, which are of a value where there's a standstill period after the award of the contract for other challenges to come forward and that kind of thing. So unless you've got the basis of assessment in there, then you are kind of stuck with the lowest price.
Yeah. No, I think definitely agree with you there, Andrew.
can I ask a couple of questions as a layperson here for anyone who might watch a recording who doesn't know these questions, like I don't know the answers to these questions. So for me, where would you go about advertising a tender or that request to tender? Where would you put that? Is there a specific website that all organizations have to, you know, put that up for, or are you just advertising over your social media? So that's one question. My next question is, Andrew, you touched on that about how do you share with other tender people the questions that have come in? So I don't know if that links to, is there a website? I know from the public sector point of view, if there's any tenders, they go onto a public sector website. Is there something similar is really what I'm trying to get to?
In my limited experience, then no, there isn't. Working both for Rothy Mercus and for CWA, we've just hunted around for known people. We've gone onto the website to find the names of contractors and then sent them invitations to tender.
Okay. Perfect. Thank
Yeah,
you.
my experience has been just the same. That you know, for Anagas, certainly we've asked around for likely contractors, and then just contacted them initially and said, "We're thinking of putting this out to tender. Are you interested?" And for those that come back and say yes, we've included them on the tender list. You know, we're not generally dealing with things which need to be advertised. You know, on the sort of wider public channels. So it's just word of mouth and knowing who's available locally and who has a good reputation locally, I think.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And I suppose then if any questions came in that you were answering for one applicant, then you would share that same question across your via email to the others, would you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when I've been setting up harvesting tenders for Rothy Mercus, I've tended to try and limit to some extent the number of agents that I've asked, just so that we don't have too many people running around the forest. And so, you know, to some extent, there is a little bit of bias going into who I'm asking, because for most harvesting tenders, even at Rothy Mercus, if it's big enough, then anyone in Scotland or the Northern England might apply for that, you know, might want to come and tender for that contract. Whereas other sorts of contracts like mounding contractors, I don't think I'd want mounding contractors to be coming from the Scottish borders to do work in the north of Scotland, just in terms of the amount that you might then end up paying for travel costs and deployment costs. But yeah, there isn't a single location for inviting tenders, and perhaps I don't know whether community groups would say, well, this is something that CWA could host, and we could have a site, you know, a web presence that does have up and coming contracts. But for most of our organizations, I would say that the time frame is quite limited. So if you put something on a website, unless contractors are scrutinizing it regularly, it may take some time for them to come back to you, and it would be quicker to get their contact details from another forester or something. Recently, I went to Greenbeard Forestry to ask for a recommended contractor, only to find that their recommended contractor said, "Oh, I'm way too busy. I only do work for this company." And so some contractors are tied up with, you know, Scottish woodlands or things like that, and it's very difficult to pry them out of their committed work. They just don't have capacity.
I suppose the thing to be mindful then is the equity of opportunity. For there'll be new companies that are willing to take on work and trying to get established and started, and if they've not got a shared place that they can access, or they're not well known yet, then their opportunities are limited.
Yeah. And Angela, you were saying that you've worked through an agent before, and now you might think of going direct to the subcontractors. So yeah, it can be quite difficult pricing those contractors out of another organization, but sometimes they are dying to do some more work locally. So just recently I've met a contractor who runs a small harvesting squad. I mean, he's basically got one smallish harvester and one medium-sized forwarder, and he would be totally up for doing work that's more local to that person, and be able to run contractors on a much closer to home than having to drive to the northeast of England to do work for several weeks at a time, depending on where he's called to by other agents. Sorry, Angela.
You're on mute, Angela.
Yeah. We use the same agent for 2 contracts. So to be fair, I mean, we learnt an awful lot from that, and we also did a lot of the kind of background legwork. So I think we made the agent's life, we were probably a very easy client for him compared to others he may have. You know, we sorted out all issues to do with roads and local consultation and everything else. So certainly second time round, the contract went probably as smoothly as it could have done, and we dealt with a lot of the grief over things like potholes in the roads, etc., etc. But the positive bit of that is that we learned a lot through that. So I'm not saying we definitely would, but we would certainly look at it so that we were saving the percentage agent's fee.
Yeah. The other advantage of having an agent is that they will be able to negotiate favorable prices from some of the sawmills.
Yes.
So that they will have access to, for example, Norboard at Inverness, Dalcross, and if as a one-off supplier you're trying to get material into Norboard, they don't want you. You know, they just don't want random deliveries, and they'll have set quotas coming from the agents and the bigger companies. So it can be quite tricky shifting material. Not always, but sometimes. That's worth discovering.
Yeah.
And it's not been unusual too that if you have a favoured contractor, a favoured agent, who comes to you with a slightly higher offer or a slightly lower offer, depending on what you're looking for, it has been known to go back to them and say, could you have a rethink on this and give me a better offer? And they might come back to you with a 5% saving that then tips the balance in their favor. I'm really reluctant to do that because I think it's unethical. You've had a tender process and it's fair, and to then go back and suggest to a contractor they should up their price or down their offer. Yeah, I'm not so familiar, so happy with that. But working with a private landowner, sometimes it doesn't, the ethics are a little bit more flexible.
I think if word gets around that you're going back to people after the tender submission date and adjusting prices, then you'll find it very difficult to get prices next time round.
Yeah, it can be.
And certainly from the point of view of a submitting contractor, it's the tender process is painful enough, and to have that kind of thing going on, you get completely pissed off.
Yeah, totally.
On that point, can I ask another silly question? Do you, as the person putting the request out for tender, do you pay those contractors for formulating a tender for you? Do you pay them their time? No.
Generally not.
And that can sometimes be, I do often feel for contractors where you might be forced to go out for tender and logic says it might be a really logical contractor to do it because it's local, etc., but you've still got to go out and get the quotes where funding is involved, and who's going to be lowest, and they are, but I often feel we've wasted
Yeah.
Not all the time, but it's for occasions when you feel this was an unnecessary process and a lot of people have put a lot of work in for that we're never going to get a chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something I have done is pay a forester for a restocking budget. So if you're trying to, put together a budget for going forward on a restocking project, and you don't want tendered prices, you just want indicative prices that you can formulate a budget to. And if you don't have, for example, I don't have any direct experience of the current restocking prices, then it's helpful for me then to ask a forester, another forestry company, to put together a budget that then gives me something to work with, and then in the future they can tender for specific work if they want it. But it helps us formulate a budget. So we've paid for budgetary advice before, but not for paying to submit a tender.
I've certainly had occasions when there have been pre-qualification questionnaires for the ultimate client to select who they will invite to submit full tenders. And you can usually find out at that stage how many tenders they're wanting to consider. And I've declined to tender when there's been, 15 or 20 or whatever people being asked to bid. I think that's just, the 5% chance of getting the contract is just not worth the effort sometimes, because some of the contracts, you have to put in an awful lot of work to answer all the questions. And, you take a view as to what your relationship with the client is like, how central the work is to what you do, and whether you've got a good chance of getting it. And sometimes just think the odds are a bit long and I've got better things to do.
Yep. Do you want me to share with you some examples of tender documents that we've got available? The first one is based on what Andrew prepared for the Anagach Woods Trust tender that CWA then bid for, and I thought this was a very useful document to include because it's a very thorough document. Let me just go back to screen sharing. See if I can get the right one this time. Oops, no, not that one. Let me. Here we go. Right, so this is now redacted.
Still the same one that's up here. So I've got Woodland Creation in front of me.
Oh, and I've changed my screen. Hang on a moment. Oh, it says share this window.
Yeah.
Right. Are we on invitation tender?
Nope, still the same one. You maybe need to stop sharing and then go back into share again.
Technicalities. It was working fine earlier on. Right. Right, we're on invitation tender for provision of a long-term forest plan, woodland management plan.
Yes.
So thank you, Andrew. This has been very useful. It can be a little bit intimidating to receive such sort of detailed invitation to tender, but you can soften that with a nice letter, covering letter. But it includes, the procedural detail of how tenders will be regarded. And so there's all of that before you then go into the scope of the tender and the details of preparing a long-term forest plan or a woodland plan, and what standards to work to. And then the timing of when the work needs to be done and when different elements of the plan have to be submitted. Any information about the process. and what's to be included in the tender price. And then how the tender is to be submitted. And additional information, supporting information. And the pricing. The tenderer must submit a fixed price for the work detailed above, but the price shall be a portion below. So you might split up your price to deliver according to the different stages. And then how the tenders are evaluated. So here, technical 65%, price only 35%. And then more detail on that, the evaluation, the marking. All carefully thought out, so that's quite detailed. Payment arrangements, so 40% on delivery of a draft, for example, and then the remaining 60% on delivery of the final agreement with Scottish Forestry, for example. And then appendices that accompany the invitation to tender, because any additional information for the tenders you've asked for in previous sections. So this is the list of supporting information that you provide to the contractors. So the client background, that's your background, previous experience, or the previous woodland management plan, compartment schedule, etc. Any questions on that one?
Is there anything you would add, Peter?
I didn't think so.
And you said it could be off-putting to receive. I mean, obviously it wasn't too off-putting because you still bid for it.
Yes, and you know, and it's helpful because it is thorough in that respect.
Can I ask, please, if the job is being funded by external organisations, are they made party to the payment stages that you've specified in this document? For instance, if they're not going to pay up anything until you're 3/4 of the way through the job, you're going to find life a bit difficult. Is that something you negotiate with the funders?
It might be in this case, and Andrew will clarify, but I think they were using reserves to pay for some of it and then the forestry grant for the rest of it, which means that the forestry grant is only paid when you put the claim in on completion of the contract and approval of the forest plan. So only once the forest plan has been approved can you put in a claim. There are very few examples of when the forestry grant scheme will let you claim in advance. And I think only some of the woodland creation grants can you apply for some of the payments in advance of completion of the contract. So you'd effectively get a loan out of the forestry grant scheme in order to pay for some of the woodland creation elements. But a job like this, no, you're expected to pay for it, and then you may have to wait at least a year, perhaps, for payment.
Yes, the grant funding was only payable on satisfactory completion of the job, but in order to encourage a range of contractors, large and small, to bid for it, and since the job extended over several months, we thought that for small contractors in particular, it was a bit of an ask to have them fund that outlay for an extended period. And since the trust had funds available from its own resources to cover part of that cash flow, that's why we offered a part payment, not halfway through, but kind of during the process, so that we could potentially attract more bids for the job.
Pierce, it's 2 minutes to the end of the session.
Okay, I'll run through the next two fairly quickly. Woodland creation. This is a much briefer example that I sort of pulled together a little bit for. Are you
Sorry
seeing?
to interrupt you. We're still seeing the previous one.
No, I thought this Teams sharing was if I do that, no, okay.
Every day's a school day.
Right, I'll go back to share.
Whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to drop into the chat, everybody, a feedback form. If you wouldn't mind at some point giving us a little bit of feedback for our funders, the request that we seek feedback from participants who join us. So you'll be able to pick that link up in the chat.
So yeah, thank you, Sharon. And this next example is what I pulled together, I think for Angela, was in relation to woodland creation. And I just ran through some thoughts as to what you might ask a forester to provide for doing a woodland creation contract, where the forester was either tendering for the whole of the delivery of the work or tendering just for their management input, and all of the items such as ground preparation and planting and weeding, they would all be agreed, negotiated separately on submission of subcontractor quotes. So we're looking at different ways to get foresters to bid for a woodland creation contract where you're talking about starting in 2024 and delivery by 2030, for example. So it's perhaps unrealistic to ask someone to tender for work that's going to be done, such as beating up or weeding 2 or 3 years ahead. So you ask for indicative prices, but a detailed tender for what your management fees might be in the first year or the first 2 years. And then I suppose, having a much more rigorous. So what I've prepared here is very much in outline, just to cover the different sorts of work and the area that's involved. And this is where you'd probably want to go and look at the management, the previous example, to pick out more clauses that you would need to cover yourself with to make sure that you're getting a fairness in your system and everyone is tendering on the same basis. So I've written up that as a fairly quick example, and what you might include, as well as this was a reference just for in terms of the Scottish Forestry publication on communities working with private sector forestry companies. That's quite a useful one to find out what the different relationships might be. But in terms of trying to formulate a tender, then it's not that helpful. But in terms of what you might add in terms of appendices or references for a woodland creation contract are some of the standards set by Forest Research or Scottish Forestry on new woodland creation. And then with respect to harvesting, this is based on examples that I've worked with before. Again, fairly lightweight, but it's looking for prices for an outturn sale. So an invitation to tender where the contractor will say what they're going to pay you for the timber that they harvest out of your wood. So this is what you would negotiate with a harvesting agent, and they would go to the sawmills to ask for prices. They would go to the subcontractors to ask for their harvesting rates for doing the felling work. And you might compartmentalize it into your different working sites. You may be operating over several different sites or in several different bits of the wood, maybe several different species, and each area may have different hazards and constraints, which you would show on a map as well as detailing them in this document. So general to all sites. So that's fairly basic in its request for basic information that you would support with maps. But you might also want to ask the contractor, the agent, to submit their tender using an Excel spreadsheet, which I'm just going to share now. And this Excel spreadsheet includes the location, the compartments, and what you want them to put in terms of the price they're offering for green logs, for slats, for chipwood, for firewood, etc. And then where they think there's work to be done by the seller, by you as the client, and what their harvesting methodology might be for each area. For example, this compartment at the bottom might have steep slopes, and they may consider cable crane operations if it was particularly steep. Or there may be factors to build in around not being able to operate around badger sets and things like that. And all of these are available from us if you want them as examples. Any questions, further questions at this stage?
Don't think so. Thanks, Piers. That's pretty comprehensive.
So Piers, do we have them on our website, or do you would people just contact you if they wanted a copy? And I presume Andrew's given permission for us to share his template.
I think you had previously, Andrew.
I must
Surely
have
you
done.
had.
I'm sure I must have done. You're welcome to it.
Thank you. No, I'll need to check again whether they're all available on the website. I know that they're on, some of them are in our shared files, but I'll need to double check.
We could maybe acknowledge Andrew at the bottom of his one that it was created by him.
Yeah.
I'm
sure I've cannibalized it from somewhere else, Sharon, so.
I love that word, that's good. It's good to share. Especially if something works well, which is good.
Do we need to go back to the presentation, Sharon?
We don't indeed. If you would be good enough to, it'll take you a couple of minutes max just to give some feedback in that link. That helps us when we have to give our feedback to our funders. So it's good to join the dots up. If you would assist with that, that would be great. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating this afternoon. You've actually been a really integral part of this. You've pulled together the perfect process, which has been wonderful. So a real collective experience this afternoon. Piers, thanks for pulling that together and your time on that today as well. And you know where to find us if you need anything. Piers and I are both either Piers or Sharon at communitywoods.org, and we'll be happy to redirect you. This recording will be going live on our YouTube channel, but that won't happen until next week now. Jen needs to do that for us, so I'll prepare it and then pass it to her to upload that for next week. and I will also share the PowerPoint with you as well when I send that out to you. Thanks very much, folks, for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Pierre. That
much.
was a really
Thanks,
good
Sharon.
session.
Thank you.